You know this relationship is hurting you. You feel the exhaustion. You feel the emotional drain. You know deep down that nothing is going to change. And still, you stay. You've told yourself 1,000 times, this is the last time. I won't go back. But something always pulls you in. Why? Is it love? Is it fear? Is it weakness? No. It's programming. The truth is, you're not weak. You're not irrational. You're not broken. You've been emotionally conditioned, trained by unpredictable affection, simple guilt, and distorted hope. Your nervous system has learned to equate chaos with connection. You don't stay because you're in love with them. You stay because you're addicted to the feeling you get when they finally give you a drop of what you've been starving for. And that is not your fault, but it is your responsibility now, because no one else can break the cycle for you. You see, toxic relationships don't just break your heart, they rewire your brain. They create patterns that override logic and hijack your sense of self-worth. So if you want to heal, you need to understand you're not tied to them. You're tied to the emotional state they've trained you to crave. You're not addicted to the person. You're addicted to the feeling, the emotional high after the pain. Not the promises, not the words, not even the memories. It's the emotional high, that momentary relief after the pain that keeps you coming back. Because every drop of affection, every rare moment of warmth, feels like oxygen after drowning. And when you're starving, even crumbs feel like a feast. Your nervous system doesn't recognize this as manipulation. It registers it as love. But what it really is relief from anxiety. And relief, when delivered unpredictably, is one of the most addictive experiences the brain can have. It's not love you're chasing, it's regulation. You've just been taught to confuse the two. But there's more. The reason you keep returning isn't just because of what you're feeling now, it's because of what your brain remembers. This is what psychologists call the trauma reenactment loop, and it runs deeper than you think. Here's how it works. When you experience emotional wounds early in life being unseen, unloved, criticized, neglected, or made to feel like you had to earn your place, those wounds don't just fade. They embed themselves into your nervous system, into your sense of identity, into the way your brain learns to interpret closeness. They become your emotional blueprint, your internal model for how connection works. And later in life, without realizing it, you seek out situations that feel just like those old wounds, not because you enjoy the pain, but because your brain is trying to finish the story differently this time. Your unconscious mind says, maybe this time I'll be good enough. Maybe this time love will stay. Maybe this time I won't be left. So, you gravitate toward people who trigger the same cold and hot dynamic, the same unpredictability, the same abandonment, just when it starts to feel safe. Because to your subconscious, that feels like home. But here's the brutal truth. You can't heal a wound by going back to the knife that caused it. Healing doesn't happen by reenacting the same trauma with different people and hoping for a different ending. It happens when you break the pattern. And toxic relationships don't just hurt. They don't just hurt you. They awaken the fears you've buried, the insecurities you masked, and the parts of you that were never fully seen, never fully held, never fully loved. That's why these relationships feel so intense, so consuming, so hard to leave. Because they're not just about now. They're a repetition of something that started long before this person showed up. You're not staying for who they are. You're staying for what they represent. the unfinished story, the unsolved equation, the hope that this time you'll finally win. But here's the truth. You were never meant to fight for love. You were meant to receive it without losing yourself. And the roots of that fight, they don't start here. They start back there in childhood. And that's where we need to look next. To understand why you stay, we have to look at how you were taught to love. Love isn't something we just know how to do. It's something we learn from the moment we're born. If you grew up in a home where love was safe, consistent, and available, your brain associates love with calm. You learn that relationships are a secure base. You trust. You relax. You connect. But if you grew up in a space where love came with conditions, where affection was mixed with criticism, inconsistency, to neglect, your brain learned something very different, that love is unpredictable. That love requires performance. That closeness means walking on eggshells. And here's the twist. That kind of love feels familiar, and the brain mistakes familiar for safe, even when it's not. This is how attachment styles form. They're not preferences. They're survival maps. And if your attachment was wired through instability, you may now equate anxiety with intimacy. You may feel most alive in relationships that make you chase, doubt, and prove. Why? Because your nervous system got used to tension, to the adrenaline of being loved one day and pushed away the next. In fact, to someone with insecure attachment, a healthy relationship might feel boring, too calm, too steady, too safe. It's not because there's something wrong with the person. It's because your emotional baseline is chaos. You've learned to call nervous system dysregulation chemistry. You've learned to call stress passion. You've learned to call unpredictability depth. So when someone shows up with clarity, consistency, and kindness, you might feel suspicious or even uninterested. And yet, when someone keeps you guessing, your system lights up. That's not love. That's emotional conditioning. And unless that blueprint is reprogrammed, you will continue seeking intensity over intimacy, conflict over connection. Not because you're broken, but because your emotional compass was built in the dark. And when your compass is calibrated to inconsistency, you become the perfect target for one of the most dangerous emotional traps, addiction through unpredictability. Imagine a lever. You press it, and food appears. You press again. Food. Again food. That's predictable. That's stable. And eventually, you get bored. Now imagine this. You press the lever. Nothing. You press again. Still nothing. Then suddenly reward. Now your brain is lit up. Excited. Hooked. This is what B.F. Skinner discovered in one of the most important behavioral studies in psychology. He called it intermittent reinforcement, the most powerful way to create obsession. Because when a reward is unpredictable, your brain becomes hyper-focused. You crave. You chase. You become willing to endure more and more for fewer and fewer payoffs. Now, replace the lever with your relationship and the food with affection. That's the trap. You're not addicted to the person. You're addicted to the hope that they'll come through just one more time. And the cruelest part, they know it works. Consciously or unconsciously. They give you just enough, a sweet message, after days of silence. an apology after cruelty, a sudden surge of tenderness when they sense you're pulling away. And your brain, trained by irregular rewards, releases dopamine, not because it feels good, but because it finally feels less bad. That's not love. That's emotional gambling. You're gambling with your soul, and every little win keeps you locked in for 10 more losses. And every little win keeps you trapped for 10 more losses. The deeper danger. Over time, this conditioning changes your standards. At first, you wanted connection. Then you settled for attention. Then for tolerance. And now you'll take whatever keeps the illusion alive. Because when dopamine is only activated inconsistently, your system learns to equate chaos with value. Uncertainty becomes thrilling. Mood swings become intensity. Disrespect becomes longing. And here's the brutal truth. The more unpredictable they are, the more your brain attaches. This is why leaving feels like withdrawal. Because chemically, it is. You've been conditioned to expect love as a series of high-stakes moments, not a steady presence. And now, even when you know it's hurting you, you chase the next hit. Because once you're hooked on emotional highs, even a single well-timed text can drag you right back into the cycle. One of the most powerful tools in a toxic relationship isn't violence. It's confusion. Because if they can confuse you long enough, they can control you. This is where gaslighting begins. Gaslighting is a psychological manipulation tactic that makes you question your own reality, your memory, your instincts, your emotional truth. You bring up a contradiction. They deny it. You mention a hurtful behavior, they say you misunderstood. You confront a pattern, they say you're too sensitive. Or worse, crazy. At first, it seems small. You brush it off. You think maybe you did exaggerate. But over time, something changes. You stop trusting your feelings. You stop bringing things up. You replay every conversation, searching for evidence to prove that what you felt was real. And that's exactly what they want. Because once you stop trusting yourself, you start depending on them to define what's real. And when someone controls your reality, they control your behavior. But gaslighting doesn't work alone. It often comes paired with another manipulation technique, projection. Projection is when they take their own flaws, their own bad behavior, and pin it on you. They lie, then call you dishonest. They flirt or cheat, but accuse you of being unfaithful. They explode in anger, but say you were the one causing the drama. It's not random. It's strategic. Because if they can keep you defending yourself, you won't have time to see the real problem them. And here's where things get darker. After enough gaslighting and projection, your internal compass breaks. You start to doubt what you saw, what you felt, what you remember. You second-guess your emotional reactions. You apologize for things you didn't do. You shrink, just to avoid more conflict. And now they have you exactly where they want, exhausted, disoriented, disconnected from your own truth. Why does this work so well? Because when your sense of self is fragmented, you stop resisting. You become easier to control, more desperate for reassurance, more willing to accept breadcrumbs as proof of love. And worst of all, you start craving their approval as the only way to silence your own self-doubt. And once you stop trusting yourself, their lies become your only compass. That's how you lose your grip on reality. Not because you're weak, but because the manipulation was designed to make you feel crazy, just clear enough to function, but cloudy enough to stay. Let's be honest. You already know this relationship is hurting you. You've probably known it for a long time. And still, you can't leave. Not because you're naive, not because you're weak, but because something deeper is holding you in place. Part of it is fear. Fear of being alone. Fear that no one else will love you like they do. Fear that if you walk away, you'll never feel something this intense again. But the other part, it's more dangerous, more hidden. It's hope. The hope that maybe, just maybe, this time, they'll change. This time they'll hear you. This time, love will be enough. It's the illusion of progress built on cycles of apology, relapse, and reset. It keeps you tied to potential instead of reality. But there's something even more painful going on, something no one tells you about. When you're in a toxic relationship long enough, you don't just lose connection to the other person. You start to lose connection to yourself. Piece by piece. You silence your instincts. You doubt your perceptions. You rewrite your boundaries. You give up your needs just to keep the peace. And slowly, without noticing, your identity begins to retreat. This is what psychologists call identity erosion. When your entire sense of self becomes structured around someone else's moods, behaviors, and validation. You were made to feel like the problem, like if you were more calm, more understanding, more patient, they'd finally treat you right. So, you overextend. You try harder. You fix everything, even when you didn't break it. Until one day, you don't recognize yourself. You're not living. You're managing. Surviving a relationship that's feeding off the version of you that keeps shrinking. That's why leaving feels impossible. Because it's not just walking away from them. It feels like walking away from the only self you've become. And that's terrifying. Because when you've spent so long adapting to someone else's dysfunction, freedom doesn't feel like peace. It feels like emptiness. And that's why leaving isn't enough. You don't just need to escape the relationship. You need to detox your nervous system from everything this love taught you to believe about yourself. Leaving a toxic relationship isn't just about walking away. If it were, you would have done it already. To truly break free, you need something deeper, a full emotional detox. Because what you're trying to let go of isn't just a person, it's a pattern, a chemical loop, a traumabond. It's addiction, emotional addiction. And just like any addiction, the first rule of healing is simple. But no contact, no texts, no calls, no stalking their socials. No, maybe we can still be friends. Why? Because every time you re-engage, you reactivate the neural loop. The same reward circuit in the brain that responds to drugs is the one triggered by intermittent affection. That's why this feels so hard, so physical, so irrational. You're not just missing them, you're in withdrawal. Your nervous system is used to chaos. It got trained to spike with stress and crash with absence. So when you go silent, your body panics. It floods you with false urgency. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe they'll change. Maybe I'm the one who needs to reach out. But that's not logic. That's the dopamine crash. And the only way to reset is to stop feeding the loop. That's what no contact really is. Not punishment, not revenge, but neurological recalibration. Of course, the first few days will feel awful. You'll feel empty, lonely, lost, like something inside you got ripped out. But that feeling isn't truth. It's detox. And to survive it, you don't just resist, you replace. This is where most people fail. They try to remove the person but leave the same void. That's why you must rebuild structure, new habits, new routines, new forms of stimulation that train your brain to regulate again. Replace compulsive checking with deep breathing. Replace rumination with journaling. Replace emotional chaos with physical movement. The goal isn't to numb, it's to retrain. To teach your brain that safety doesn't have to feel boring, and stillness doesn't mean abandonment. And here's a tool. Make a list, not of the good times, but of everything that broke you. Every moment they lied. Every time you begged for clarity and got silence. Every time you made yourself small just to keep them close. Reread it. Whenever your mind starts rewriting history, let the truth ground you again. Because after disconnection comes the hardest part, not surviving the loss, but rebuilding yourself from what's left behind. After the silence, after the withdrawal, after the emotional detox, comes the most important part of all reconstruction. Because when you leave a toxic relationship, you don't just walk away from someone else. You walk away from the version of yourself that was shaped to survive them. And now, you need to remember who you were before the damage. What did you love? What made you laugh? What gave you energy before you started pouring all of it into someone who only took? Start there. This is not about moving on. It's about moving back inward. Because toxic relationships don't just wound your heart, they fracture your identity. They convince you that you're hard to love, that you're too much or not enough, that your needs are unreasonable, that your boundaries are flaws. So the work now is to unlearn the lies and rebuild the truth. And that starts with reclaiming your voice. You do that by creating space to listen inward, to hear yourself again. One of the simplest and most powerful tools is therapeutic journaling. Start with prompts like, what have I abandoned about myself to keep someone else? What would I do differently if I knew I was already enough? What would my day look like if it centered me? Don't filter. Write raw. Write real. Because on paper, your truth has no opposition. Next, affirmations. Not cheesy mantras, but grounded, personal truths you speak out loud, especially when your old patterns try to return. Affirmations like, my boundaries are valid. I don't need to prove my worth. Love that requires self-abandonment isn't love. Say them daily, in the mirror, with eye contact. Yes, it may feel awkward at first, but that's not weakness. That's rewiring. That's how you begin the process of mirror reparenting, speaking to the part of you that was never affirmed, never protected, never fully seen. Because healing isn't just about moving forward. It's about going back and becoming the adult your younger self always needed. And as your identity rebuilds, so does your capacity for love, real love. The kind that doesn't demand your silence, the kind that doesn't punish your needs, the kind that doesn't come wrapped in fear. Because you never needed someone else to make you feel worthy. You only needed to remember how to love yourself. There comes a moment, after all the reflection, after all the withdrawal, after all the rebuilding, where one question remains. Will you keep destroying yourself for a love that was never real, or will you finally choose yourself? Not in theory, not as a concept, but as a daily decision, as a lived standard. Because here's the truth. No one is coming to save you. Not them. Not time. Not closure. Not the next person. And if you're still waiting for someone to validate your pain, for the past to make sense, or for the perfect moment to let go, you'll wait forever. Because healing doesn't come from something outside you. It begins when you finally say, "This is where it ends. This is where I stop giving myself away." And yes, it will hurt. You'll miss them. You'll question yourself. You'll look at your phone and fight the urge to check if they miss you too. But none of that means you're wrong. It just means you're healing. Letting go is not weakness. It's maturity. It's love in its most honest form. Love that no longer asks you to die for it. This is your threshold moment, where you get to decide if the rest of your life will be built on your trauma or on your transformation. And I'll be blunt with you. If you don't make this choice now, the cycle will repeat. You'll find someone new who feels eerily familiar, and the wound will deepen. But if you choose differently, if you choose you, everything changes. Not immediately, not without discomfort, but deeply, permanently. You will begin to attract peace instead of adrenaline. You will value consistency over chaos. You will stop chasing and start choosing. So here's what I want you to do. Comment below, "I choose myself." Say it out loud. Say it like you mean it. Say it to your past self, your future self, and the version of you who almost forgot what you're worth. Because when you choose yourself, you will never again return to what once destroyed you. Not because it won't call you back, but because you finally learned how to say no.